Thank you for watching our first Game Development Club podcast, co-hosted by Game Dev Club members Pranav Harakere, Manu Bhatt, and yours truly, Ryan Lee. Our guest today is Mr. McLeod, who teaches AP Computer Science at Cupertino High School to over 100 students every year. Over the course of this podcast, you'll learn about his experience working in the game development industry. Just to get some more background info, what did you do? What was that industry experience before you became a teacher?
Right out of college, I worked at a company called B Square. Actually, they were called Mainbrace, and then they got acquired by B Square. And I graduated in 2000, so not too long afterwards, the big bust came. So that was kind of how I started out my coding career, with a little bit of a rough patch. And so I actually went into teaching originally because it was at the same time that they were at the same time that they were laying off all the engineers, they were also looking for teachers. So quite a few people went from tech into teaching at that time. But then I always did, I was still interested in coding, and I played around with it. Like I was especially interested in making games, and actually developed. I got hardcore back into it when I decided I wanted to make an iPhone app, and I made a roguelike game, which is still up on the store, called Seed of Evil.
Nice name.
Cult game. It has you can either play it with normal mode, or you can play it permadeath mode. Permadeath mode is super hard. I looked at the leaderboards recently, and there's literally 2 people who have beaten my game on permadeath. Very recently, like literally the second one just beat it on like Monday.
What? Oh wow! It's still getting Wait, how long ago did you make it?
So it's actually been out for a couple of years, and I've tinkered with it here and there. And it's definitely, it's not a blockbuster hit. It's definitely one of those, like, if you're hardcore into like difficult games and you like the old style roguelike experience, the unforgiving dungeons that can, you can be all high on how strong your character is, and then all of a sudden, oops, I messed up. Now I'm dead.
What kind of game engine was this developed in?
So I actually created this using Cocos 2D.
Oh.
Most of the game engine graphics, effects and stuff. And I actually have a combination of like Cocos 2D and like native iOS views. I kind of intermixed them a little bit, but for the most part, the graphics engine is Cocos 2D, and then some of the UI I use native like table views and stuff from the native from the iOS library.
You still update the game?
Not a lot, but I've updated it. I update it sometimes, and I still get, people ask for a few features here and there. So not as much as I used to, but I think I've updated it as recently as like last summer, at least, for sure.
Still working on it, still playing on it.
Yeah, it's kind of like has a little small community. They're into it.
Pretty good.
Mr. McLeod, did you make any other games, or was that your basically only major one?
So that was like my main like published game that I made completely 100% myself. I did all the artwork, assets, and just to clarify, I either got assets from, I did a mixture of getting assets from mostly opengameart.org, and a combination of that and like creating my own when I needed to. And I did a lot of modification of the ones that I found there. But so it's kind of like I was all the departments. And I actually even made the music was completely made by me on, actually some of the music was made by me. I have to modify that. Originally all the music was, and then I added some extra music that was really nice to add some more variety. But yeah, I even like composed and recorded music on GarageBand. So that was pretty fun. And then I also, so then I worked in my second round in the tech industry was after I got back into making games again. I went and got a job at a company called Game Closure. And they make, basically they make games in JavaScript and release them on all sorts of platforms.
Well, it just became summer, right? 21st of June. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I worked in a so basically they created games in JavaScript and released it on all sorts of platforms. So they had games that were released on iOS and Android, all from the same code base. So they had in fact, they had their own in-house development environment and game engine. And in fact, that was, so one of the main things that I worked on in that game, in that company was developing their platform, which then they, would sell to other developers.
So did B Square or Game Closure make any, popular games that maybe you worked on?
Yeah, the interesting thing about them, they loved to pivot, and they had like a library of games, and like sometimes they would like release them and then pull them and then re-release them later, and they'd like fiddle with them, and they're always doing new things. So the main big game they were working on when I was there was a game called Bubble Story, and it was a bubble shooter game. But I've looked later and like that one's not there, and like all the other ones that I looked at their website and they're like, here's our games, and I'm like, none of these are any of the games that they made when I was there. They have like completely new games. So I think they're always like pivoting and releasing new games on different platforms. And I know that when I worked there, they were trying to make, they added some more games for a platform called Kick. I don't know do you know about Kick?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so you can play like
KIK
games on
KIK, yeah.
Yeah, KIK, yeah. So, and I actually made, when I was there, they had me make like a Flappy Bird version for that. It was called Flappy Dragon. But I don't think it's on there anymore or anything. So, yeah.
I think it might have to do, what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think it might have to do with like the how certain platforms get outdated, I guess, or like companies like to like update their hardware. Or
yeah, so that was a big part of why they like to have, they had their in-house system for that could easily release from the same code base games on different platforms. Was the idea there was that whenever a new platform comes out, usually like the people that make the most money are the first people that make games for that platform. So they always, were like ready to swoop in and be first mover and like have the first few games on a new platform. So that was one of their things, I think. Yeah, and actually working in an actual game company was pretty awesome because I didn't have to do everything, right? I had artists that could like get me the artwork that exactly was what I wanted. I didn't have to just like look around and see if I could find something that went with what I had. I could actually get it custom made. It was pretty awesome. And just working collaboratively with them on special effects and stuff was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just having another person to, they had product managers that were basically would make decisions about like, okay, here's the way that we want it to be. So they helped with a lot of the planning. So that's something that's, I'm not sure if people know when you're going into whether it's game development or any kind of software development, there's lots of roles you can go in that don't directly do code. It's more like you do all the planning for and working with the customers to decide like exactly here's how things are going to work logically, so that when someone codes it, they're not just like making it up as they go along.
Like it sounds like you have the artists like who design things for games, the project manager who had like the main vision for the project, obviously.
Yeah.
And then you said you had like people talking with customers.
Well, so if you were making a product for like on order from a customer, and it could be from like a company that wanted you to make a certain product, then the product manager and the UI designer, UX designer, right, user experience, would want to discuss with them and solidify exactly what they want. Because one of the biggest things with software development is you might make something that you think is cool, but then other people don't, or in particular, the person you're making it for doesn't want it that way, so you want to make sure that what you're building is what your customer is expecting. Now, in the case of, if you're making games and you're just releasing them, and the game, the customer is, of course, all the other people out in the world that are going to play your game, you can sometimes still get feedback from the customers by doing like a beta test, and then they can tell you what they like, but you kind of have to have something first usually in that case. But the most important thing was that you had to know exactly what you were making before you made it, because I did have an experience where that didn't go right, where I made the same tutorial several times because it wasn't clearly established exactly how logically things were supposed to work. And finally, myself and the senior developer I was working along with were just like, okay, let's hold a meeting with the product managers and like, let's establish once and for all how this is supposed to be, so that we aren't, going around and around in circles here. Because the right process is that you have a clear, not just written, but also like pictures. So the artists will also draw up like a mock-up of like, here's a mock-up of like the UI that you want if you're adding a new UI scene. And so that you're not just like, oh, well, I think the button should just go there, right? The programmer doesn't decide necessarily where the buttons go. All of that's decided by the UI designer or the product manager, right? So that before you do all the coding to place everything where it needs to go, it's already been decided what it's supposed to look like.
Are there any other like major differences between like working as a solo game developer and then working in a game company? Like you already mentioned how you have the artists doing work for you, but is there anything else that stands out to you?
Well, I think when you're working solo, it is a lot easier. It's not better, but it's easier to break the rules, which would be a bad thing, because it's easier to just sit down and start coding without having a clear plan. Because then when you're done coding, I guess that's the plan, whatever you got, right? Whereas if you're working with a team through, it's a lot less likely that the process would look like that, because your teammates would be like, whoa, wait, before you get going, like, let's clearly establish what we are doing here, right? And especially if you're working with, the other thing is if you're working with multiple coders, like, you have to communicate. But yeah, I mean, working in a team is harder at first because you can't break the rules. So it feels harder, right? Like, you can't just start coding without having a clear plan for big picture. How's this going to look, right? Because otherwise, how are you going to tell your other teammates what they're supposed to do? What's their part of the plan, right? And you should follow the rules when you're working on your own too. And I discovered that in my, through the years of developing, I've definitely had my share of like wasted time when I spent a long time like making something, and then when it was done, I decided I don't like it, so I made it again different, and I still didn't like it, and then finally I was like, yeah, maybe I should just like get some, just draw what it's supposed to look like and decide and really plan out exactly how I want it to look and how it's supposed to work before coding. So, I mean, I've definitely learned some of these lessons, the hard way myself. Yeah.
Generally, like, what kind of programming languages or tools did you use to make your games?
The game that I made, that I was talking about in earlier, I made in Objective-C directly for iOS. And, I've made games, small games that I haven't necessarily like released in all sorts of platforms.
Okay.
But I think JavaScript and Objective-C and Java are kind of like probably the three languages I've used the most. And of course, Java and JavaScript are the ones that I use the most recently, because those are the ones I'm teaching classes in.
Yeah.
But I've even done stuff in like Python. I made so when I applied to Game Closure, the interview was basically, well, I mean, there were multiple parts to the interview, right? So there was like the part where I talked to, the hiring manager first, and then, well, not really. Yeah, he was like, it was a small company, so it was like, there was like office manager / HR, kind of guy that I talked to first. And then I got given a project to do. So the project was to make a chat server. And it was kind of open-ended in that, you have a basic requirement that it's a chat server. And then from there, add as much as you want. So I ended up using PHP to make the chat server, like the server side. And then I ended up making 2 different clients. One of them was a web client. So you could log into the chat server and just directly on the website. And then I also made a version that was a like direct telnet client, like you use it like a console app. So it was interesting. I had a lot of fun learning in that project because that was like the first time I'd ever like made a server before. That was like the first time I really like made anything like a chat server. So it was an interesting problem because when I got it, I was like, holy smokes, that's cool, pretty fun, but a little bit scary because I'd never done this before. But they ended up liking it quite a bit. They said it was, obviously I got the job, right?
How many programming languages do you know? You've already mentioned PHP, JavaScript, Objective-C, and a few more. So how many do you know?
Let's see. Yeah, so there was there's different levels of like knowing.
Yeah.
Like I've done a few things in Python, but I wouldn't say I'm that great at Python. I've like just done a few problems on coding that pretty much.
No.
Although actually the interesting thing is, so then some of the code, when I worked at Game Closure, their server side code was in Python. So even though I didn't know Python, I had to debug a few things. And so one of the things like about multiple languages is, even though there's lots of multiple languages and, they definitely have their own little details and quirks that you kind of have to know to, there's also big picture, they're very similar, right? And you could debug something that's written in Python, even though you don't really know Python, as long as the bug isn't like a quirk of Python, right? But
so as long as the logic makes sense.
Yeah, like if it's a big picture logic bug, you can clearly see the logic, the flow. I mean, especially since there's always all these jokes about how Python is pseudocode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still remember a video I watched where the guy on the video says, okay, so I'm just going to write in pseudocode since the point of this is just the logic. And then he proceeds to write Python. I was like, that's pretty funny. Okay, so back to languages that I know. So I wouldn't really include Python as one that I'm like super familiar with. I'm just like casually. Java, JavaScript, Objective-C. It's been too long since I did anything in C++, so I wouldn't really count that as like a language that I'm like super familiar with. But the thing is, like, learning languages is easy, and you might learn a language and you do a little bit in it, and then if it's been a while, you might have to like brush up on it again when you come back to it. Let's see, I've done a little in Arduino too, because I did that we even did a little bit with that in Intro to Java. So you remember Sparky, that was Arduino.
Sparky.
Yeah. And which is basically like C, right? It's a modified C. Let's see, I mentioned PHP and definitely, yeah. So I think we've talked about enough of them.
I do really want to ask you a couple more questions. Like,
yeah, go ahead.
Namely about you mostly talked about your time at Game Closure, and that would make sense. This is the game development club, but I also want to know what it's like, how working at a game development company, or like a company that works on projects that are related to games, how that would compare to more traditional software development company like B Square. That's what I'm guessing.
So B Square is, so at the time that I was working there, they were creating PDAs, like small, this was like before smartphones. So these were like the pre-smartphones, right? Like the little miniature computers that you could, write notes in and stuff like that. And it was definitely very early in the space. Now they're actually, I looked them up there to see what they're doing now lately, and they've definitely pivoted to like fully IoT now. So, but what I did there was a lot of work on like making drivers and kind of like a lot more low level stuff. It wasn't like UI, like I wasn't making any kind of user interfaces or anything like that. It was more under the hood, like drivers and stuff. So as far as like the product, I was definitely a lot more excited making games than I was making drivers. But there's still something fun. It's kind of like, if you guys have done enough coding that you can have tons of fun on like a coding bat style problem, even though it's not like you're making some awesome program that people are going to have fun with, right? Like it solves a problem. So, yeah, and actually that job I was writing in C++. But that's definitely one of those where it's like, it's been a long time since I did C++. Objective-C is kind of similar, but and you can actually mix in C++ with Objective-C. But there's also major differences. But yeah, so I guess what you're really asking for is, what is the difference in like what you do on the job? And ultimately, I would say programming is very similar, whether you're making a game or making any other product, really. At least, unless you're just, so if you're generally working in a team, you have to have a clear plan of what exactly are you what is your code supposed to do? And in the case of games, you might have to have a good idea of like, what is it supposed to look like too, right? If you're doing the front end, so you'd be working a lot more with the UX designer and product managers. But yeah, I mean, I think that the process is very similar regardless of what kind of software you're making. I wouldn't say that like working at a game company, the process is totally different, although the people you work with might be different. Like you wouldn't be working with artists if you were just writing drivers, right? But you could definitely be working with artists if you're making a web app that's supposed to, help people buy groceries or something, because the artist's going to help design the website and how is it going to look, and draw the little graphics in there, and so I think that the number one skill to have out in the industry, apart from just like your coding skills, is being able to work with others and communicate and take someone else's vision and make it come alive, which is different and sometimes more difficult for people than taking their own vision and making it come alive, right?
Yeah.
Because being able to understand what they want is a different story. That's what successful teams do, though, because if all you're doing ever is just making what you want, then you're losing out on most of the other teams' ideas, right? So
Yeah. Altruism, I guess, is pretty important in any software or any job, really, I guess.
yeah, collaboration skills are huge.
Yep.
And these days, you can definitely, like, I guess I proved it, that you can definitely make a full application on your own. But it's a lot more common, more likely that you're going to be making things with other people. And certainly you'll eventually make stuff with other people, unless you completely go like, I'm just going to make I'm going to make independent projects and that's it. And that's all I'll ever do. Right. Like, I don't know. That's unlikely.
For the Java students.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I guess to close this out, maybe something a little lighter. Do you still play any games?
I do. I've been playing a lot of Roblox games because I have a 9-year-old son who is always into the next Roblox game. So he definitely influences my gaming choices. I also played some games. He also likes to look on Steam, and so he likes the TD Balloon. What was it?
Balloons TD.
Yeah, Balloons TD. That was it. We were
Yeah.
playing that on Steam. That was fun.
Yeah.
And on Roblox, he likes things like he likes his latest craze that I've been playing a lot of games with him on are like adventure games where you get to wander around the map, killing monsters, doing quests. So, yeah. So like, what was it? The one that we were just playing a bunch was World of Magic. And another of his favorites is Vestraria. He says so, and I like Vestraria and I like World of Magic. They're fun, and I like seeing what other people have done. It gives nowadays, a lot of times it gives me ideas too, and I'm like, I'm getting started on a game. We're gonna try to make a game together on Roblox. We made a simple game last summer, just like a straight sword fighting game. You log in and countdown happens as soon as there's at least 2 people in the server, and then it like teleports you to a map, and you have to kill each other with swords, and whoever kills the other person first is declared the winner. Or if there's like 5 people, right, it's like whoever's last man standing, the winner, and you get teleported back. It was like pretty straightforward, simple game, but it was fun. He loved to take that around to his friends, and they all played together. It was fun. Actually, the interesting thing about Roblox is like you could be like making a game and then like you publish it just to like go test it, and you meant to just go test it yourself. But then like if you have a friend could just like pop into your game while you're testing it. It's pretty fun. That actually happened to us. Like we were just testing the game, we were playing with ourselves, and all of a sudden one of our Dungeon Quest friends like logged in. I'm like, oh, holy smokes. He's like, oh, you're making a game? Like, yeah, let's play. It was pretty fun.
Pretty cool.
So yeah, so I really liked how Roblox makes it super easy, to have the social aspect of gaming is like just built in. You get it for free. Your game is automatically multiplayer, and then of course you get a lot of the physics and you get a lot as a starting point.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Yeah, you're welcome.